The bell above Sweet Dreams Bakery chimed softly as Nam Ki-jun stepped inside, his tailored black suit a stark contrast against the pastel-pink walls adorned with whimsical cake photos. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon wrapped around him like a warm embrace, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He was here for one purpose: to order the most elaborate engagement cake money could buy for a wedding he dreaded. His dark eyes swept the cozy interior, taking in the display cases filled with delicate pastries and the soft jazz playing overhead. This place felt like stepping into another world, far removed from the steel and shadows of his usual domain. As the head of the Haneul organization, Ki-jun commanded respect through power and fear, but here, surrounded by sugar-dusted counters and the gentle hum of contentment, he felt oddly displaced. "I'll be right with you," called a melodious voice from behind the counter. Ki-jun's breath caught. That voice, warm honey over smooth jazz, was one he'd never forgotten, no matter how hard he'd tried. His heart hammered against his ribs as a figure emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her dark hands, a bright smile lighting up features that had haunted his dreams for 6 years. Senna Hendricks froze mid-step, a small boy perched on her hip, his chubby hands covered in pink frosting. The child looked up at Ki-jun with curious brown eyes, completely oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in the universe. "Ki-jun?" Senna whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft music. Time seemed suspended in the sweet-scented air of Sweet Dreams Bakery. Ki-jun stood frozen, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis, as he stared at the woman who had once been his everything. Senna looked exactly as he remembered, radiant dark skin that seemed to glow from within, natural hair styled in elegant twists, and those expressive brown eyes that had always seen straight through his defenses. But now she held a child, a beautiful little boy who couldn't be more than 5 years old. "Mama, who's the fancy man?" Caleb asked, his voice carrying the innocent curiosity that only children possessed. His small fingers were sticky with frosting, and there was a smudge of flour on his cheek that made Ki-jun's chest tighten unexpectedly. Senna's arms instinctively tightened around her son, her protective instincts kicking in. "This is an old friend, baby. Ki-jun, this is my son, Caleb." The little boy studied Ki-jun with the serious expression of someone much older. "Are you here for cupcakes? Mama makes the best cupcakes in the whole world. I help sometimes, but I mostly just make messes." He giggled, a sound that was pure sunshine. Ki-jun found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Hello, Caleb. I'm actually here to order a cake." "Ooh, what kind?" Caleb's eyes lit up with excitement. "Mama can make anything. She made a castle cake for my friend's birthday, and it had real towers and everything." "Caleb, sweetheart, why don't you go wash your hands while I help this customer?" Senna's voice was steady, but Ki-jun caught the slight tremor underneath. "Okay, Mama." Caleb wriggled down from her arms and scampered toward the back of the bakery, his small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Senna moved behind the counter, creating a physical barrier between them, her professional mask sliding into place. "What can I help you with today?" Ki-jun stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "I need an engagement cake. Something elaborate. Money is no object." Something flickered in Senna's eyes, hurt perhaps, or disappointment. She reached for an order pad, her movements precise and controlled. "When do you need it by?" "1 week from today." "That's quite short notice for an elaborate cake." Her pen hovered over the paper. "How many guests?" 200. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Senna's pen stilled. That's a big wedding." "It's a big merger," Ki-jun said quietly, immediately regretting his honesty. Their eyes met across the counter, and for a moment the years melted away. He was 26 again, studying business at UCLA, completely captivated by the brilliant literature major who challenged everything he thought he knew about life. She was the girl who made him believe he could choose love over duty, hope over obligation. "Congratulations," Senna said finally, though the words seemed to stick in her throat. Before Ki-jun could respond, Caleb came bounding back, his hands now clean but his face still sporting that adorable flour smudge. "Mama, can I show him my special cupcakes?" "Caleb, we're working. Please, they're really good. I made them myself." The little boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and despite the tension crackling between the adults, Kijun found himself genuinely curious. "I'd like to see them," Kijun said, surprising himself. Caleb beamed and rushed to a small display case near the register. "These ones. I made the frosting myself. Well, Mama helped, but I did the swirls." He pointed to a tray of cupcakes that were clearly the work of a 5-year-old, lopsided, over-frosted, and absolutely charming. "They look delicious," Kijun said, and meant it. "Would you like to try one?" "Mama says sharing makes everything taste better." Kijun glanced at Senna, who was watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. "If it's all right with your mother." "Of course," Senna said softly. "Caleb, get Mr. Nam a plate." "Just Kijun is fine," he said, accepting the slightly misshapen cupcake from Caleb's eager hands. The frosting was too sweet and the cake a bit dense, but as Kijun took a bite, he couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. "This is excellent, Caleb. You're a natural baker." The little boy practically glowed with pride. "Mama's teaching me everything. She says baking is like magic. You mix love with flour and sugar and happiness comes out." Kijun's throat tightened. "Your mother is very wise." "She's the smartest person in the whole world," Caleb declared with the absolute certainty of a child. "She reads me stories in different languages, and she can make any cake you can dream of, and she gives the best hugs when I'm scared." Mrs. Rosa Gutierrez emerged from the kitchen, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun, her kind eyes taking in the scene with obvious curiosity. "Senna Mika, is everything all right out here?" "Mrs. G, this is Nam Kijun. He's here to order an engagement cake." The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly as she studied Kijun with the shrewd gaze of someone who'd seen enough of life to read between the lines. "Ah, see, welcome to Sweet Dreams. Senna is our master baker. She'll create something beautiful for you." "I have no doubt," Kijun replied, his gaze never leaving Senna's face. Chloe Patel appeared from the back room, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her apron dusted with cocoa powder. She took one look at the tableau, Senna's tense posture, Kijun's intense stare, Caleb happily munching on a cupcake, and her eyes widened with understanding. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh my." After some gentle maneuvering by Mrs. Gutierrez and Chloe, Kijun found himself alone with Senna again. The weight of unspoken words pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. "So," she said, her voice deliberately light. "An engagement cake. Tell me about your fiancée." Kijun's jaw clenched. "Her name is Lee Jiun. She's suitable." "Suitable?" Senna repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "How romantic. Guys, Senna, does she know about your business?" The question was sharp, cutting. Kijun's eyes hardened. "That's not relevant to cake design, isn't it? I mean, should I avoid certain colors? Red might be a bit too on the nose, don't you think?" The barb hit its mark. Kijun stepped closer to the counter, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know anything about my life now." "You're right," Senna said, meeting his intensity with her own. "I don't. Because you made sure of that when you disappeared without a word 6 years ago." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Kijun's hands clenched at his sides, the urge to explain, to tell her everything, warring with the knowledge that some truths were too dangerous to share. "I had my reasons. I'm sure you did." Senna's smile was sharp as glass. "Well, congratulations on finding someone suitable. I'm sure you'll be very happy together." Before Kijun could respond, Caleb came racing back into the front room, his face bright with excitement. "Mama, Chloe taught me how to make chocolate curls. Can we put them on the fancy man's cake?" The innocent question broke the tension like a stone through glass. Senna's expression softened immediately as she looked at her son. "That's a wonderful idea, baby. I'm sure Mr. Nam would love chocolate curls on his cake." Kijun found himself nodding, though he couldn't have cared less about cake decorations. All he could focus on was the way Senna's entire being seemed to light up when she looked at Caleb, the pure love that radiated from her, like warmth from a fire. They spent the next few minutes discussing details, flavors, timeline, delivery logistics. But underneath the professional conversation, Kijun was acutely aware of every breath Senna took, every gesture she made, every moment their hands accidentally brushed. I'll have some preliminary sketches ready by tomorrow, she said finally, if you'd like to come by and review them. I'll be here. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the bakery, the other customers, even Caleb seemed to fade away. There was only them, only this moment, only the weight of everything they'd lost, and everything that might still be possible. As Ki-jun prepared to leave, Caleb tugged on his jacket. Ki-jun, will you come back and help me make more cupcakes sometime? The request was so hopeful, so trusting, that Ki-jun felt something crack open in his chest. I'd like that very much. Promise. Ki-jun looked into those innocent brown eyes and felt his world shift again. I promise. The next afternoon, Ki-jun found himself standing outside Sweet Dreams Bakery, his usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar nervousness. He'd spent the entire night thinking about Senna, about Caleb, about the life that could have been. The bell chimed as he entered, and immediately he was greeted by the sound of laughter from the back room. Caleb's giggle mixed with Senna's warm chuckle, creating a melody that made Ki-jun's chest ache with longing. "We're back here," Senna called out, her voice carrying a lightness it hadn't possessed yesterday. Ki-jun followed the sound through a doorway marked staff only and found himself in a spacious kitchen that looked like something from a fairy tale. Senna stood at a large island, her hair pulled back in a colorful headband, flour dusting her dark skin like stardust. Caleb perched on a step stool beside her, his small hands covered in what appeared to be chocolate frosting. "Ki-jun," Caleb exclaimed, his face lighting up. "Look what I'm making, it's a chocolate mountain." Ki-jun moved closer, studying the elaborate creation taking shape under Caleb's enthusiastic but inexpert hands. "That's very impressive." "Caleb is my official taste tester," Senna explained, her smile more relaxed than it had been yesterday. "He takes the job very seriously." Someone has to make sure everything tastes perfect," Caleb said solemnly, then immediately contradicted his serious tone by licking frosting off his fingers. "I have your sketches ready," Senna said, wiping her hands on her apron. "But first, would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That would be nice, thank you." As Senna moved to pour coffee, Ki-jun found himself studying the kitchen more closely. Children's drawings were taped to one wall, clearly Caleb's artwork depicting various cakes, and what appeared to be the three of them as stick figures. Family photos were scattered among professional certificates, showing Senna and Caleb at various ages, always together, always smiling. "Mama went to school for a really long time," Caleb announced following Ki-jun's gaze. "She has lots of fancy papers that say she's smart." "I can see that," Ki-jun said, noting the culinary degree from Le Cordon Bleu alongside a literature degree from UCLA, the same university where they'd met. "She was going to be a teacher," Caleb continued, "but then she decided baking was more fun, and she's really, really good at it." "Caleb," Senna said gently, returning with a steaming mug. "I'm sure Ki-jun doesn't need my whole life story." But Ki-jun found that he desperately wanted her whole life story. He wanted to know about every moment he'd missed, every decision that had led her here, every smile and tear and triumph that had shaped the woman standing before him. "Actually, I'd like to hear it," he said quietly. Senna's eyes met his, and something passed between them, a recognition of the time they'd lost, the conversations they'd never had. "Maybe later. Right now, let me show you what I've designed for your cake." She spread several sketches across the counter, each one more elaborate than the last. The designs were stunning, multi-tiered masterpieces that looked more like architectural marvels than desserts. "These are beautiful," he said, because they were. "You're incredibly talented." "Thank you." Senna's professional pride was evident. "I was thinking we could incorporate some traditional Korean elements if you'd like. Cherry blossoms, perhaps. Or a more geometric design inspired by hanbok patterns." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion caught Ki-jun off guard. "You remember." "I remember a lot of things," Senna said softly. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken memories. Ki-jun remembered lazy Sunday mornings when Senna would quiz him about Korean traditions, her genuine curiosity about his heritage, making him fall deeper in love with each question. "Can I help decorate the fancy cake?" Caleb asked, breaking the spell. "Oh, sweetheart, this is a very special cake for grown-ups," Senna said gently. "But I'm a good decorator, look." Caleb gestured proudly to his chocolate mountain, which had grown significantly more elaborate and significantly more unstable since Ki-jun's arrival. Ki-jun found himself crouching down to Caleb's eye level. "You know what? I think every cake needs a little bit of magic from an expert like you." Caleb's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? Maybe you could make some special decorations that your mum could incorporate into the design." "Can I? Mama, please?" Senna looked between her son and Ki-jun, something unreadable flickering in her expression. "I suppose we could find a way to include some of Caleb's artistic touches." Working side by side, they fell into an easy rhythm that felt achingly familiar. Senna would point out spots Ki-jun had missed while cleaning, and he would tease her about her perfectionist tendencies. Caleb provided running commentary on their cleaning technique. "You guys get an 8, he announced. "You would get a 10, but Ki-jun missed that spot right there." Ki-jun looked where Caleb was pointing and indeed found a small smudge of frosting. "You're absolutely right. Thank you for keeping me honest." "That's my job," Caleb said importantly. "Mama says everyone needs someone to keep them honest." "Your mama is very wise," Ki-jun said, his eyes finding Senna's. "Do you have a mama?" Caleb asked with characteristic directness. The innocent question hit harder than Ki-jun expected. "I did. She died when I was young." Caleb's face immediately crumpled with sympathy. "That's really sad. I'm sorry." "Thank you, Caleb. That's very kind of you to say. Do you miss her? Every day?" Without warning, Caleb climbed down from his stool and wrapped his small arms around Ki-jun's legs in a fierce hug. "Hugs make everything better. Mama taught me that." Ki-jun's throat closed up completely. He looked over Caleb's head to find Senna watching them, tears glistening in her eyes. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hands on Caleb's back, returning the embrace. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're right. That does make it better." When Caleb finally pulled away, his face was serious. "If you want, you can share my mama. She gives really good hugs, and she makes the best grilled cheese in the world, and she reads stories with all the voices." The offer, delivered with such innocent generosity, nearly broke Ki-jun's heart. "That's very generous of you, Caleb." As they finished up and Ki-jun prepared to leave, Caleb tugged on his jacket again. "Ki-jun, will you come back and help me make more cupcakes sometime?" "I'd like that very much." "Promise?" "I promise." Friday arrived with the kind of crisp Los Angeles morning that made everything seem possible. Ki-jun had barely slept, his mind churning with thoughts of Senna, Caleb, and the impossible situation he'd created for himself. He arrived at Sweet Dreams Bakery to find Senna in the kitchen, putting finishing touches on what was undoubtedly the most beautiful cake he'd ever seen. 5 tiers of pristine white fondant decorated with delicate cherry blossoms that seemed to dance across the surface. It was elegant, sophisticated, and utterly beautiful. It was also completely wrong. "Senna, this is incredible," he said, because it was. "Thank you. I incorporated some of Caleb's design elements." She pointed to small, almost invisible details, tiny rainbow touches hidden among the blossoms, subtle dragon-scale patterns worked into the base. "They're very subtle, but they're there." Ki-jun felt his throat close up. Even in creating a cake for his engagement to another woman, Senna had found a way to include her son's joy, his innocence, his love. "It's perfect," he whispered. Caleb appeared from the back room, his face bright with excitement. "Ki-jun, look what I drew for your cake." He held up a colorful drawing of a towering cake decorated with dragons, rainbows, and stick figures. "This is remarkable," Ki-jun said, settling into a small chair. "Tell me about it." "Well, this is you." Caleb pointed to a tall stick figure in black. "And this is your bride, lady, but I don't know what she looks like, so I gave her a crown because brides are like princesses, right?" "Right," Ki-jun managed, his heart breaking. "Are you sad? You look sad?" Caleb observed with brutal honesty. Ki-jun crouched down to Caleb's level. "I'm not sad exactly, more complicated." "What's complicated mean?" "It means when you want 2 different things at the same time, and you can't have both." Caleb considered this seriously. "Like when I want ice cream and vegetables for dinner." "Something like that. Mama says sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice." The wisdom in those simple words hit Kijun like a physical blow. He looked up at Senna, who was watching their interaction with an unreadable expression. After Caleb was gently redirected by Senna, the kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of refrigeration units. "He doesn't know," Kijun said quietly. "Know what? About us. About what we were." Senna's hands stilled on the invoice she was preparing. "There's nothing for him to know. We were college kids who dated for a while. Ancient history." "Is that really how you remember it?" Senna's laugh was bitter. "How I remember it doesn't matter. What matters is what happened." "Senna, don't." Her voice was sharp now, all pretense of professional politeness gone. "Don't you dare try to rewrite history now. You left, Kijun. You disappeared without a word, without an explanation, without even a goodbye." The pain in her voice was like a knife to his heart. "You talked to Seungjun?" "I was desperate. I thought maybe he'd know where you were if you were okay. He told me you'd made your choice, that you decided your family obligations were more important than whatever we had." "It wasn't like that," Kijun said quietly. "Then what was it like?" "My father was dying," Kijun said, the words coming out in a rush. He had maybe weeks left and the organization was in chaos. There were rival families circling like vultures, ready to tear apart everything my grandfather had built. I had to choose between watching my family's legacy crumble or stepping up to take control. Senna went very still. "Your father died?" 3 weeks after I got back to Korea. I spent those last weeks learning everything I could about the business, about how to keep our people safe, and then I spent the next 6 years trying to legitimize everything, to move us away from the old ways. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd want to come with me, and I couldn't let you do that. That wasn't your choice to make, wasn't it? Kijun's voice was rough with emotion. You think I could have brought you into that world? You think I could have watched you try to navigate the politics and the danger and the constant threat of violence? So you made the decision for both of us. I made the only decision I could live with. They stared at each other across the kitchen, 6 years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them like a wall. I was pregnant, Senna said quietly. The words hit Kijun like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, his hand reaching for the counter to steady himself. What? I found out 2 weeks after you left. I was scared and alone and had no idea how to reach you. Kijun's mind reeled. Caleb is your son. Yes. The kitchen spun around him. Kijun felt like he was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Caleb, sweet, innocent, brilliant Caleb, was his son, his child. Why didn't you? How could you not tell me? Tell you what? Tell you that the man who abandoned me without a word had left me pregnant and alone? I would have come back if I'd known. Would you? Senna's eyes blazed with anger and pain. Would you really have abandoned your dying father and your family's legacy for a pregnant girlfriend you'd already walked away from once? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kijun wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that he would have made a different choice, but the truth was he didn't know. I don't know, he admitted quietly. At least you're honest. Senna's voice was flat now, emotionless. I spent the first 2 years of Caleb's life thinking you might come back, that you might somehow find out about him and want to be part of his life. But you never did. So I stopped waiting. Senna, I'm so sorry. If I had known, but you didn't know. And now you're here ordering a cake for your engagement to another woman, and my son thinks you're just some nice man who likes his cupcakes. Kijun felt like his world was crumbling around him. Everything he thought he knew, everything he'd built his life on, suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of this revelation. Does he know about me? He knows his father isn't in the picture. He's never asked for details, and I've never volunteered them. He's happy, Kijun. He has a good life, a family that loves him, a future full of possibilities. I won't let you disrupt that. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Nothing, Senna said, and the finality in her voice was devastating. I want nothing from you. I want you to take your beautiful cake, marry your suitable bride, and leave us alone. Senna, please. Her voice broke slightly. Please just go. Kijun stood there for a long moment, memorizing every detail of her face, every nuance of her expression. Then, because he was a coward, because he didn't know how to fight for something he'd never learned to value above duty, he nodded. "I'll have someone pick up the cake tomorrow." As Kijun walked toward the door, he heard Caleb's laughter from the front room, bright and innocent and completely unaware that his world had just shifted on its axis. "Kijun," Senna called softly. He turned back, hope flaring in his chest. "He's a good kid. The best. He deserves better than a father who puts business before family." The words were a challenge and a dismissal all at once. Kijun nodded once, then walked away from his son for the second time in 5 years, leaving his heart scattered across the flour-dusted floor of Sweet Dreams Bakery. The engagement dinner was held at Nobu Malibu, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the Pacific Ocean. Kijun sat surrounded by the most powerful families in the Korean-American business community, and felt completely hollow inside. The conversation flowed around him, discussions of territorial agreements and the advantages of uniting the Nam and Lee family interests, but all he could think about was Caleb's gap-toothed smile and the way Senna's eyes had looked when she'd told him about their son. Lee Ji-eun sat beside him, elegant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She was beautiful, intelligent, and perfectly suited to be the wife of a man in his position. She was also a stranger. "Kijun seems distracted tonight," Ji-eun's father observed, his tone carrying just a hint of concern. "Just tired," Kijun replied smoothly. "It's been a busy week." His phone buzzed with a text message, and Kijun glanced down to see a photo from Chloe Patel. It showed Caleb in the bakery kitchen, his face covered in chocolate frosting, holding up a lopsided cupcake with a huge grin. The message read, "Thought you might like to see the master baker at work. Senna asked me to send this." Kijun's breath caught. Senna had asked Chloe to send him a picture of Caleb. Despite everything, despite her anger and pain, she'd thought of him. "Who's texting you?" Ji-eun asked, leaning slightly to see his phone. "Work," Kijun said quickly, turning the screen away. But as he looked at the photo again, studying every detail of his son's face, Kijun felt something shift inside him. This little boy, his little boy, was growing up without him, and Kijun was sitting in a restaurant planning a wedding to a woman he didn't love, while his real family was miles away. "Excuse me," Kijun said abruptly, standing from the table. "I need to make a call." He walked out onto the restaurant's terrace, the cool ocean breeze doing nothing to calm the storm in his chest. His phone buzzed again. Another photo from Chloe, this one showing Caleb asleep in a chair in the bakery office, his small body curled up like a kitten. The message read, "Long day for the little guy. Senna's working late to finish your cake." Kijun stared at the image, his heart clenching. Senna was working late, probably exhausted, while their son slept nearby. She was doing it all alone, just as she'd been doing for 5 years. "There you are." Kijun turned to find Ji-eun approaching, her expression concerned. "Is everything all right? You seemed upset." "Just business complications," Kijun said. Ji-eun moved to stand beside him at the railing. "You know, we don't have to do this if you don't want to." The unexpected words made Kijun turn to look at her fully. "What do you mean?" "This marriage, this whole arrangement." Ji-eun's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "I know it's what our families want, what makes sense for business. But if your heart is elsewhere..." "Ji-eun..." "I'm not blind, Kijun. You've been distracted ever since you went to order the wedding cake. And just now, when you got those text messages, your whole face changed. You looked happy, hopeful." Kijun studied her face, looking for signs of hurt or anger, but found only understanding. "You deserve better than a husband who's in love with someone else." "Yes, I do," Ji-eun said simply. "And you deserve better than a wife you're marrying out of obligation." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken truth settling between them. "What will you tell your family?" Kijun asked. "That we realized we weren't compatible, that we want different things from life. It won't be a complete lie." Kijun felt something loosen in his chest, a pressure he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "Are you sure about this?" "Are you?" Kijun thought about Caleb's laughter, about Senna's fierce protectiveness, about the family he'd walked away from once and was being given a second chance to claim. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm sure." Ji-eun smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their engagement began. Then go get them. It might not be that simple. Senna has good reasons not to trust me. Then you'll have to prove that you've changed, that you're worth the risk. As they walked back into the restaurant to make their announcement, Kijun felt his phone buzz with one more message from Chloe. This one was just text. She still loves you, you know. She's just scared. The announcement was met with shock, concern, and ultimately grudging acceptance. Ji-eun handled the questions with grace and diplomacy, while Ki-jun found himself thinking about tomorrow, about walking into Sweet Dreams Bakery, not as a customer ordering a wedding cake, but as a man fighting for his family. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Ki-jun stood outside Sweet Dreams Bakery at exactly 9 o'clock, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the window, he could see Senna moving around the kitchen, her movements efficient and graceful. Caleb sat at the small table in the corner, carefully arranging what appeared to be an army of toy dinosaurs. The bell chimed as Ki-jun entered, and both Senna and Caleb looked up. Caleb's face immediately lit up with joy. "Ki-jun, you came back. Look, I brought my dinosaurs to show you." He held up a small plastic T-Rex. "This one's name is Chomper, and he's the king of all the dinosaurs." "He's very impressive," Ki-jun said, crouching down to examine the toy with appropriate seriousness. "Does he help with the baking?" Caleb giggled. "Dinosaurs can't bake, silly. They don't have the right hands for mixing." "That's a very good point. I hadn't considered the hand situation." While Ki-jun engaged with Caleb, he was acutely aware of Senna watching them, her expression unreadable. "Your cake is ready," she said, when Caleb became absorbed in arranging his dinosaurs. "Actually," Ki-jun said, straightening up, "I need to talk to you about that." Something flickered in Senna's eyes, wariness, perhaps, or resignation. "If you want changes to the design, it's too late." "I don't want changes to the design. I want to cancel the order." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Senna went very still. "Cancel?" "The engagement is off. The wedding isn't happening." Caleb looked up from his dinosaurs, his young face scrunched in confusion. "But you already have the pretty cake. Why don't you want it anymore?" Ki-jun looked at his son, and felt his heart clench with love and terror in equal measure. "Because I realized I was about to marry the wrong person." "Oh." Caleb considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old philosopher. That would be awkward. Despite everything, Ki-jun found himself smiling. Very awkward. "Caleb," Senna said, her voice carefully controlled, "why don't you take your dinosaurs to the back room? I need to talk to Ki-jun alone." "Okay, Mama." "But can Ki-jun come see my dinosaur city when you're done talking?" "We'll see, baby." The moment Caleb was out of earshot, Senna's professional mask cracked. "What game are you playing?" she demanded. "No game. I called off the engagement last night." "Why?" "Because I can't marry someone else when I'm in love with you." The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they could cross. Senna's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, anger, hope, fear. "You don't get to do this," she said finally. "You don't get to walk back into our lives and blow everything up because you suddenly had an attack of conscience." "I'm not trying to blow anything up. I'm trying to fix what I broke." "Some things can't be fixed, Ki-jun. Some damage is permanent." "I don't believe that, and then you're a fool." But there were tears in her eyes now. "Maybe I am, but I'm a fool who loves you, who's loved you for 6 years, even when I was trying to forget you. Who wants to be part of Caleb's life if you'll let me?" "He doesn't need you," Senna said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not, but I need him. I need both of you." Senna turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "You have no idea what it was like, being pregnant and alone and terrified. You did make the right choice. Look at him, Senna. Look at what an incredible kid you've raised. You did that all by yourself. And what about your business, your family obligations, the world you live in?" Ki-jun had been expecting this question. "I'm working to legitimize everything, to move away from the old ways." "That's not good enough. I won't expose Caleb to that world, not even on the edges. Then I'll leave it." The words came out before Ki-jun had fully processed them, but once they were spoken, he realized he meant them completely. "What?" "I'll leave the organization. Turn control over to Seung-jun. You can't just walk away from something like that." "I can, I will, for you, for Caleb, for the family we could be." Senna stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception. "You're serious. Dead serious." Mrs. Gutierrez emerged from the office, her wise eyes taking in the tension between them. "Mija," she said to Senna, "perhaps you should listen to what this man has to say. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet." "It's complicated," Senna said weakly. "The best things usually are." Mrs. Gutierrez patted Senna's shoulder. "Take the day off. Talk to this man. Figure out what your heart is telling you." After some gentle persuasion from Mrs. Gutierrez and Chloe, Senna agreed to walk with Kijun to a nearby park. They sat on a bench surrounded by oak trees, watching children play on the swings. "So," Senna said finally, "you called off your engagement." "I did, because of us. Because I realized I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Again." Senna was quiet for a long moment. "He asks about you, you know. Not directly, but he asks why some kids have daddies and he doesn't. Kids are intuitive. He's never done that before, never taken to a stranger so quickly." Senna's voice was soft, wondering. "It's like he recognized something in you. Maybe he did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Senna spoke again. "If I let you into his life, into our life, I need to know you're serious. I need to know this isn't some midlife crisis or guilt-driven impulse that you'll regret in 6 months. It's not. How can you be sure?" Kijun turned to face her fully. "Because I've spent 6 years trying to forget you and failing miserably. Because seeing you with Caleb, seeing the life you've built, the woman you've become, it made me realize that everything I thought mattered doesn't matter at all if I don't have you." Tears were sliding down Senna's cheeks now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I. What if we try this and it doesn't work? What if you decide the sacrifice is too much? What if Caleb gets attached to you and then loses you? What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what could have been?" Senna laughed shakily. "When did you become an optimist?" "About 5 minutes after I walked into your bakery and realized what I'd been missing." She was quiet for so long that Kijun began to think she was going to say no, but then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Okay. Okay? Okay. We can try, but slowly, carefully, with rules." Kijun's heart soared. "Whatever you need. I need you to prove that you're serious about leaving your old life behind. I need you to show me that you can be a reliable presence in Caleb's life. And I need time. Time to trust you again. Time to figure out if what we had can become what we need." "How much time?" "As much as it takes." Kijun nodded, understanding that this was the best offer he was going to get, and more than he deserved. "What about Caleb? What do we tell him?" "The truth, age appropriately. That you're someone special to me, that you want to spend time with us, that we're going to see if we can be a family. And if he asks about me being his father, when he's ready to know, we'll tell him. But that's a conversation that happens when I'm sure you're going to stick around." As they walked back toward the bakery, Kijun felt lighter than he had in years. It wasn't going to be easy. He had a lot to prove, a lot of trust to rebuild. But for the first time since he'd left Senna 6 years ago, he felt like he was walking towards something instead of away from it. When they returned to Sweet Dreams Bakery, they were greeted by the sound of Caleb's delighted laughter. He was standing on a step stool at the main counter, carefully piping frosting onto cupcakes under Mrs. Gutierrez's patient supervision. "Mama! Kijun! Look what I made!" He held up a cupcake that was more frosting than cake, decorated with what appeared to be a rainbow made of sprinkles. "It's for you," he announced, holding the cupcake out to Kijun, "because you looked sad earlier, and cupcakes make everything better." Kijun accepted the offering with hands that weren't quite steady. "Thank you, Caleb. This is the most beautiful cupcake I've ever seen." As Kijun took a bite of the overly sweet, slightly lopsided cupcake, he thought about the perfect wedding cake sitting in the back room. Elaborate, expensive, and completely meaningless, this cupcake, made by his son's small hands and given with pure love, was worth more than all the strategic alliances and business arrangements in the world. "So," Chloe said, appearing from the back room with barely contained excitement, "did you two figure everything out?" "We're going to try," Senna said simply. "Yes." Chloe pumped her fist in the air. "I knew it. This is the best day ever." "What's the best day ever?" Caleb asked, looking confused but excited. "Today," Ki-jun said, ruffling his son's hair. "Today is the best day ever." And as he stood in the warm, flour-dusted kitchen, surrounded by the scent of vanilla and the sound of his family's laughter, Ki-jun realized he was finally, truly home. 9 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery, casting golden light across the display cases filled with fresh pastries and elaborate cakes. The familiar chime of the bell announced the arrival of the first customers of the day, but Ki-jun barely looked up from his task. He stood behind the counter, his sleeves rolled up and his hands covered in flour, carefully piping decorations onto a 3-tier birthday cake under the watchful supervision of his 6-year-old assistant. "No, Appa," Caleb said with the patience of someone far beyond his years, using the Korean word for father that had become as natural as breathing. "The roses have to be bigger, like this." He demonstrated with his own piping bag, creating a frosting rose that was indeed much more impressive than Ki-jun's attempt. "You're absolutely right," Ki-jun said solemnly. "I clearly need more practice. That's okay. Mama says practice makes perfect, and you've only been learning for 9 months. It took me a whole year to make good roses." Ki-jun smiled, still amazed by his son's generous spirit and natural talent. In the 9 months since he'd walked back into their lives, Caleb had accepted him with an openness that both humbled and terrified Ki-jun. The transition hadn't always been smooth. There had been tantrums, confusion, and moments of heartbreak, but there had also been magic, bedtime stories told in a mixture of English and Korean, Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market, quiet moments when his son would fall asleep against Ki-jun's chest while they watched cartoons. "Is the birthday cake almost ready?" Senna asked, emerging from the kitchen with her hair pulled back in a messy bun and a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She looked beautiful and harried and completely perfect. The simple gold band on her left ring finger caught the morning light, a promise ring Ki-jun had given her 3 months ago when she'd finally said yes to his proposal. "Almost," Ki-jun said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "What do you think, Chef Caleb?" Caleb studied the cake with the serious expression of a professional critic. "It needs more sprinkles. Everything's better with sprinkles." "Sprinkles it is," Senna agreed, reaching for a container of rainbow sprinkles. As she moved past Ki-jun, he caught her hand gently. "You have chocolate on your face," he said softly, reaching up to brush the smudge away with his thumb. "Occupational hazard," she murmured, but she didn't pull away from his touch. They were taking things slowly, just as Senna had insisted. Ki-jun had kept his promise about leaving his old life behind. The transition had taken months of careful planning, but it was done. Ki-jun now ran a legitimate consulting firm, helping other organizations transition away from illegal activities. It was satisfying work that didn't require him to compromise his values or put his family at risk. "Appa," Caleb said suddenly, "can we put a dragon on the cake? Dragons are cool." Ki-jun's heart still skipped a beat every time Caleb called him that. The conversation about Ki-jun being his biological father had happened 4 months ago, prompted by Caleb's increasingly direct questions. Senna had handled it with characteristic grace, and Caleb had processed the information with the resilience of childhood before moving on to more important matters, like whether they could get ice cream for dinner. "I think a dragon would be perfect," Ki-jun said, reaching for the green frosting. As they worked together, Caleb directing, Ki-jun executing, and Senna adding finishing touches, the bell above the door chimed. Oh Seong-jun entered, looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit among the pastel decorations. "Hyung," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry, Ki-jun." "It's okay," Ki-jun said, wiping his hands on his apron. "How did the meeting go?" "Better than expected. The transition is complete, everything's running smoothly." Ki-jun nodded, grateful for his friend's support during the difficult months of stepping away from the organization. "Uncle Seong-jun," Caleb called out, having adopted the honorary title. "Look at our dragon cake. It's magnificent," Seong-jun said seriously. "The dragon looks very fierce. Ki-jun made the body, but I made the head because I'm better at dragon heads. I can see that. Your dragon head is clearly superior." Caleb beamed with pride, then turned back to his decorating with renewed enthusiasm. "How are things?" Seong-jun asked Ki-jun quietly. "Good. Really good." "No regrets." Ki-jun looked around the bakery. at Senna humming softly as she arranged pastries in the display case, at Caleb carefully adding final touches to their dragon cake, at the life they were building together, one day at a time. "None," he said firmly. "I'm glad. You look happy, Hyung. Happier than I've seen you in. Well, ever. I am happy." And it was true. Kaijun had never imagined that happiness could be found in flower-dusted aprons and early morning baking sessions and bedtime stories about brave knights and friendly dragons. But real happiness, he'd learned, was about being trusted with a child's secrets and being forgiven for past mistakes and being allowed to love someone completely and without reservation. "Mama," Caleb said suddenly, "can we tell Kijun about the surprise now?" "What surprise?" Kijun asked, looking between his son and Senna. Senna's cheeks flushed pink, and she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "It's not really a surprise. More like news." Kijun's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Senna?" "We're having a baby," she said softly, her voice full of wonder and joy. "Caleb's going to be a big brother." Kijun felt his knees go weak. Another child. Another chance to be there from the beginning, to not miss a single moment. "Really?" he whispered. "Really?" Senna confirmed, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes!" Caleb pumped his small fist in the air. "I'm going to teach the baby everything, like how to make cupcakes and how to draw dragons and how to be brave." Kijun pulled Senna into his arms, holding her close as the magnitude of their growing family washed over him. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you. All of you." "We love you too," Senna whispered back. As they stood there in the warm, flower-dusted kitchen, surrounded by the scent of vanilla and the sound of Caleb's excited chatter about being the best big brother ever, Kijun reflected on the strange turns life could take. He'd come to Sweet Dreams Bakery to order a cake for a wedding that would have been the biggest mistake of his life. Instead, he'd found his family, his future, and his home. Sometimes, the best things came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes love was patient enough to wait for second chances. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to discover that the life you'd always wanted was waiting for you behind a bakery counter, covered in flour and holding a little boy who would teach you that the sweetest things in life couldn't be bought or negotiated or arranged. They could only be earned through love, patience, and the courage to choose happiness over obligation. "Can we name the baby Cupcake?" Caleb asked seriously, making both adults laugh through their tears. "We'll definitely consider it," Senna said, ruffling his hair. "Or Dragon. Dragons are really cool." "We have plenty of time to think about names," Kijun said, crouching down to Caleb's level. "But first, we need to finish this birthday cake. What do you say we add some extra magic to it?" "Yes, the best magic ever." As Caleb dove back into decorating with renewed enthusiasm, Kijun caught Senna's hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For letting me be part of this. For showing me what really matters." "Thank you for proving you were worth it," Senna replied, her voice soft with emotion. The bell chimed again as more customers entered, and the morning rush began in earnest. But as Kijun moved behind the counter, serving coffee and pastries alongside the woman he loved, while their son chatted happily about his upcoming role as big brother, he knew he'd made the right choice. He'd come to buy an engagement cake and found his forever instead. And that was the sweetest ending of all. Mrs. Gutierrez emerged from the office, took one look at the glowing faces around her, and smiled knowingly. "Ah, mija," she said to Senna, "I told you sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet." "You were right, Mrs. G," Senna said, leaning into Kijun's side. "You were absolutely right." As the morning sun continued to stream through the windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery, illuminating a family that had found each other against all odds, Kijun realized that some stories didn't end. They just began again, sweeter than before. And in a bakery filled with the scent of vanilla and the sound of laughter, where a Korean Mafia boss had learned to pipe frosting roses, and a little boy was planning to teach his future sibling about dragons, love had indeed conquered all.